Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Paul Epstein, and I'm speaking to you from Beijing, China. And I want to thank you for being part of this session in this program. Thank you for everything that you do for children, for their families, for the people you work with in your schools. I think together we are making an impressive difference in the world. My topic is going to take us into the center of a revolution that's been occurring now for perhaps 25, 30 years, maybe longer. And I'm talking about a knowledge revolution. And depending with whom you speak, this knowledge revolution is either, to borrow from Charles Dickens, it's either the best of times or it's the worst of times. I'm of the opinion that this is one of the most exciting times. I kind of put myself in the middle of the best and the worst. I think it's exciting because the technology that's occurring, the technology that's we're using every day that's evolving our lives, well, I think it is out of control. But what's exciting to me is the anticipation of what wonderful benefits can occur. Now, we can either allow the currents of all of this technological change guide and dictate to us, or we can contribute to its growth, its direction. And that's what I hope to speak about and present to you in this presentation, that we in Montessori education have something very, very important to contribute and to offer to the entire world. Well, we've always known that. We've always talked about that. So let's dive in. Let's get really specific about what is that contribution. So let me go ahead and organize sharing my screen with you. Okay, you're looking at a title of this talk, Montessori Education and the Knowledge Evolution. And I'm with an organization called Designs for Lifelong Learning, where we are working with Montessori schools, teacher education, administration education. We do online courses and online programs as well as live at schools or at training centers. I invite you to be in touch with me about this presentation or anything else you wish to be in touch with. You can see my email under my name. And I want to share with you that what I'm wanting to speak about and present comes from over 50 years of my work and life with children. Specifically, children have been my teachers. The lessons that they keep teaching me, the lessons that I keep trying to learn. Fortunately, the children are very patient, as I'm not the quickest of learners. So, as the education director of Designs for Lifelong Learning, I'm excited and proud to share with you what those lessons have been, what the children have been teaching. Now, we in Montessori education speak about children always in process of learning, process of developing and evolving themselves. And it is a process that involves you and me intimately with them. We are not only observing how children construct knowledge, we're also observing how children construct life. And that larger picture, the constructing of life, is how we are always relating with children. And I want to say also with adolescents too. We're partners together. They're instructing us, we're instructing them. So our knowledge evolution has to be rooted in this intimate relationship that is always taking place between us, whether it's us adult to adult, us adult to children or adolescent. Knowledge is not something that is only in a book, or knowledge is not something that's only out there. Knowledge is always within us, and is always occurring in the relationship that we celebrate and enjoy together. Specifically, I want to share with you 4 topics during this presentation. First, the question that I want to ask is, what is knowledge? And I just started to say a little bit about it being both out there and within us and existing within relationships. I'm going to go further. Second, I want to ask the question, what is the Montessori understanding of how children and adolescents construct knowledge? How does that happen? And I wish we had more time to explore, how do you and I as adults, how do we do that? Do we do it similarly to children and adolescents, or do we do it in a different way because we're adults? And I wish we had time for that question. Third topic that I want to explore with you is this question: how should we guide children in today's knowledge evolution? No question about it. Knowledge is exploding, both in quantity, but also in its quality. Knowledge itself is evolving, what it means to know, what it is we should know. So, how do we guide children and adolescents through this process? And finally, I want to speak and look with you together at how can our Montessori principles evolve this knowledge? How can our Montessori principles evolve ourselves? Knowledge, again, is not something separate from us. It's also part of us. So to evolve knowledge is to evolve ourselves. All right, let's dive into these guiding topics, these guiding questions. First, the first question again is, what is knowledge? And this is a question that has occupied people, turns out, for thousands of years. In a diagram of knowledge that's being used today, it's a diagram called DIKW, and it looks like this: data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. This scheme or diagram involves knowledge as a part of something more, something larger. And this basic idea, DIKW, originated with Plato. And possibly he borrowed it from someone else, so maybe it originated before Plato presented it to the rest of us. Data. Data are isolated facts. Data are facts that are not yet analyzed, not yet interpreted. For example, 16 cups, or 16 grams, or 180 centimeters. Those would be facts of measurement, not yet interpreted, not yet having any particular meaning. Now, if I added an interpretation, and here's a piece of data, let's say the data is 110 degrees Fahrenheit. My interpretation would be, that's very hot. I wouldn't be very comfortable living in an environment of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So what I've done now is I have added information to the data. The meaning, the information has meaning. It gives context to say 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the context of heat, living in that environment. With information, I'm able to answer questions about who, what, when, where, how. And again, I can say it as a piece of data, as a fact. The temperature today is 110 degrees. Or I can say the temperature today is a very uncomfortable, humid 110 degrees. And now I've added meaning, interpretation to the data. Knowledge, knowledge includes both data and information. Knowledge is information that we understand from analysis and from interpretation of that. So knowledge is both subjective and also shared. There are people who have a knowledge for how to live comfortably in this 110-degree temperature. There are people who can share that knowledge, that subjective information for how to dress, what foods to eat, what liquids to drink, and more and more and more, that now as knowledge, that fact, 110 degrees, with my meaningful interpretation, I don't like it, combine it with that knowledge of how to live comfortably, can change my relationship to the data, can change my relationship to the interpretation using that knowledge. Knowledge answers questions again of how and why. And you can apply knowledge and also make predictions. Knowledge allows us to see patterns. When it's 110 degrees and I see people dressing like this, moving and behaving like that, eating foods and drinking liquids like this and that, that's telling me how I can successfully survive and possibly enjoy a temperature of 100 degrees. So knowledge involves us with knowing how to interact. Now, children are surrounded by data, they're surrounded by information, and they're surrounded by knowledge. Children are constantly observing and making connections between what they hear people say about, or how people behave, or how people consider and talk about the data. They hear, see, experience how people are applying that information, how they're living their knowledge. So children are constantly, actively constructing knowledge through their senses, through their environment, by engaging socially, by engaging in cultural context. That's part of growing up, and it is part of everyday living. When we have knowledge, we begin to understand why. Knowledge assists us in moving from the who, the what, the where, the when, into the how, and also into a larger why, which brings us into wisdom. We can progress from knowledge into wisdom. Knowledge is what we should do and how we should do it. Wisdom allows us to decide how we're going to and why we're going to behave and use our knowledge in very particular practical ways. With wisdom, we begin to make well-informed decisions. We can consider with wisdom consequences if I do this, or consequences if I don't do this. We can also consider with wisdom values about what's best, what is right. So with wisdom, I'm able to anticipate and predict if I continue to apply my knowledge and live in this particular way, well, is that really the right thing for me to do? Is that really the best for me to do? Wisdom allows me, just to summarize, wisdom allows me to apply knowledge and make decisions about what is happening. And for example, I could say, and given that it's probably going to rain, it's probably best that I set up tents and I get ready for potential flooding. Good news, that 110-degree temperature might come down after the rain, but some other news, I better be ready for the floods all that rain might produce so that I can apply my wisdom and continue with good living. Now, normally, we don't separate, we don't stop to separate. Is this data? Is this information? Is this knowledge? Is this wisdom? It's sometimes, I think, all mixed together. And I think that's fine that it is mixed together. So we don't have to pause, think about, is this data now? Is this information? Is this knowledge? Is this wisdom? Here's an example of all of this together. I want to share with you a very short video. This video is cultural information presented to us as cultural wisdom. Now, on the table, we see a collection of different foods from one region in China. And these foods have data. They are facts. Yes, this is made out of that food, or this made out of that fish, or it's made out of these spices. That would be data. The information is how to combine with the different spices, the different liquids, the different foods, how to bring it together to bring about this particular set of dishes that are common in this part of China. The knowledge is knowing how to combine all that. When do I add this? When do I put that with that? Where do I fix it and cook it and all of that? Knowing how. The wisdom is why these foods are really wonderful and part of who we are in this part of China. So you'll hear these women speaking to us about this knowledge and data and information and wisdom, and it's translated for us into English. Let's have a look.
你们好，我是云南省桂林市平定县的人。这个呢是我们那个这个是毛粉，它是用豌豆把它磨细之后，沥出来的浆可以做这个稀豆粉，就是稀豆粉。然后那个豆壳还有豆渣可以做成这个毛粉，就是粗粮，对身体非常好。还有这个是夜来香的花和鸡蛋炒在一起。来到我们桂林嘛，总要吃一点那个鲜花做的菜。然后这个是洋芋饼，就是用洋芋把它那个就是煮熟了之后，把它弄碎之后做成饼，然后再用油煎出来，特别香。我们云南人还有桂林人的说，吃洋芋长子弟，男的吃了这个洋芋会变帅，女的呢吃了洋芋之后变漂亮。我们云南的食物呢，最有特色的地方是每道菜都可以有蘸水，可以蘸着吃。这个稀豆粉呢，可以洋芋饼蘸着吃，也可以油条蘸着吃。还有这个蘸水呢，它有丰富的调料，那个层次非常的丰富。吃肉类还有各种东西都可以蘸着吃，非常美味。欢迎来我们昆明平定做客。
My point in sharing this video with you is that knowledge is information that has context, and it's information we interpret, and we share that information. And these ladies have shared with us specific foods that are common in Yunnan. And I was at the table while they were describing and talking about all of these dishes. And yes, I ate many of those potato cakes, hoping to become more handsome. And knowledge tells us how to live. It tells us how to make sense of ourselves, how to understand our world. Together, when we're members of a culture, a religion, an organization, all of the knowledge are specific to the cultural group. We could have filmed a group of people from any part of the world talking about the foods that are special and important to them in their way of life. I just chose this one example I happen to enjoy. So, knowledge, data, information, wisdom, that has been with us for centuries. None of that is new. What is new is the speed of the increase of data. What is new is the speed with which we are struggling, according to some, or celebrating, according to others, interpreting and creating new knowledge from this massive amount of data. It has been called recently big data because we now have computers that are capable of collecting and using not little bits of data, but huge quantities of data, astronomical quantities of data. We live now a life that is immersed with big data. Big data is a class of study at many universities throughout the world. Degrees are being earned in this topic of big data, using big data to make well-informed decisions, well-informed models and predictions, big data with AI to create knowledge has been surrounding us now for a number of years. So again, it's the amount of knowledge, the sources of knowledge, the ways that we're now interpreting knowledge. All of that is growing exponentially. And it's occurring as we are technologically one global community. So together we are immersed voluntarily or otherwise in this exponential growth of data and information. The result is more knowledge has been created now in the last very few years than in all of human history combined. That's not my statistic. It's a statistic that I'm seeing again and again throughout internet sources, books, and other information sources. More knowledge has been created in the last very few years than in almost all of human history combined. You know, when I went to school, knowledge seemed, well, available. I remember a bookshelf at home, a set of encyclopedias. There it was, all the knowledge we could possibly need to know and have to know. And if I wasn't busy memorizing knowledge from those books, I was memorizing knowledge from teacher notes that I wrote as teachers gave lectures day after day, memorizing, memorizing, memorizing. And of course, I did well sometimes on the tests to see how well I had memorized. And of course, I forgot almost everything that I had memorized after the test. And I know that happened to you also. I didn't worry about learning how to forget, which is what I did do. I learned how to forget. But I didn't worry about it because I could go home and there on my shelf were the encyclopedia books. These days, of course, I don't need a set of encyclopedia books. I have this, or I have an iPad, or I have a laptop. All the information you and I could possibly need is right here through the internet. More information produced in the last few years than all of human history. There's no reason to memorize. We need instead to understand how to relate, how to interact with that big data. So, how are we interacting? Many different forms. Social media. Social media presents a wealth of information nonstop. You know the expression 24/7, 366. Websites present that big data packaged into information according to what is the specific purpose or reasons for those particular websites. Computers are pumping databases full of information at us nonstop. Information comes to us in the forms of movies, TV shows. You and I, perhaps we are paying money every month for some kind of cloud storage, which is filled with photographs or videos that you and I are constantly taking. Pictures we're taking, videos we're constantly making and sending up to storage somewhere in the cloud. Emails come nonstop, filled with information. So too are customer records. Every time you and I purchase, or every time you and I pursue or look quickly at a website, that website is collecting information about you and me. Whether it's a purchase, it knows my name, my address, my phone number, my credit card information, the bank account information, the amount of money's in my bank account. And even if I don't purchase, but I pause just to read quickly what's on a screen, they've caught me. They know that I have an interest. And my website is going to now present me with information about that topic. We're surrounded by data with industrial systems that are producing all of the goods that we could possibly want, didn't know about, and soon will hear about. Digital records. Digital records are being produced all the time from customer records and so forth. Blogs, reports, presentations, music files, and now AI systems, not to mention video conferences that have been around for a number of years. This is just a small list of the sources that surround us with big data. It is now estimated that the amount of big data is 175 zettabytes. That's 1.75 times 10 to the 23rd power. 175 zettabytes. All of this knowledge explosion has been exponential. Exponential amount. Imagine a 10 with 24 zeros, and that's the amount we're talking about. Interestingly enough, there's more data than the number of known stars throughout the universe. The known universe that we've been able to observe is said to have between 100 to 200 billion galaxies. And each galaxy has somewhere, it is said, between 100 billion and 1 trillion stars. Big numbers. And the number or big number for big data is bigger than all of those possible stars. Honestly, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine these big numbers. But here's what I do know. This big data is surrounding us. It's not going away. It's part of our everyday life. It's more than my phone. For another example, a digital record, I drive down the street and any number of cameras that are posted on those streets are collecting digital records about me. Or if I go on a subway, or if I get on an airplane, or. We are surrounded by big data. For some of us, this is problematic, and for some of us, this is exciting. I can't decide for you which group you might be in, and I have to say I'm somewhere in the middle. Take a look, for example. 2/3 of today's children will have jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that have not yet been invented. Trying to solve complex problems we have not yet solved. That is tremendous, tremendous change. It used to be in human history that the work that I did was the work my father did, was the work that his father did, was the work that his father, for generations, century after century, We all basically did the same thing. We don't live that kind of human life. We haven't lived that kind of human life since the dawn of the industrial era. But now it's the speed. What kind of education, what kind of knowledge do children need to learn? What kind of education do they need to have to exist in a world where, in just a short period of time, two-thirds of them will have jobs that don't exist using technologies that have not yet been invented? So we are surrounded by this technological explosion. We are surrounded by constant change, constant growth. We are constantly living through incredible disruption. And that's the result of big data, tremendous disruption in what we know, how we know it, what we should do with it, what we will do with it, and so forth and so on. So let me continue and come back now to my second topic framed by this question. What is the Montessori understanding of how children and adolescents develop knowledge? Is our understanding of how children and adolescents develop knowledge, is this something that we should change and do differently because of this tremendous technological and knowledge explosion? Or is how we understand the development of children and adolescents' development of knowledge, is that sufficient to take us into this unknown, rapidly emerging future? We know that children and adolescents actively use their senses and they actively use objects. We know that the development of understanding, of knowledge, occurs when children are moving, when they initiate, when they make choices. We know that their ability to see and hear, feel a weight or a texture, smell something, is how they are constructing knowledge. They're not passive recipients. They're not minds empty. They're engaging always with their environment, using their senses to develop knowledge. And the more they're active, the more they move, the more their senses are being used, the more brain neurons are connecting. Knowledge is an understanding that occurs from analysis and interpretation of information. So what the children are doing is they're constructing understanding. We could call that knowledge, because with their understanding, they're making sense not only of the information, but they're also making sense of what they can do with that information. For example, the child in this photograph with the stamp game is using her senses and is actively moving the different stamps to construct some kind of arithmetic problem. Now, her knowledge of the math, her knowledge of place value, her knowledge of the arithmetic process, all of that is coming about from her repetition of activity, her repetition of using her senses. What that means is she is being successful in the developing, the constructing of knowledge. That's an important Montessori understanding. My question is, do we need to or should we change our understanding because children are growing up now in a rapidly changing world? Say it again. Are the children needing to change, or will they change how they construct knowledge because of this technological and big data revolution? The summary again is that children construct knowledge through activity, using objects and their senses. I could have put that in there. And as they get older, they'll also construct knowledge with ideas. In the first picture in the top right, this child is using an eyedropper to transfer liquid from one cup to a second cup. In the second picture on the top, moving over to the left, these two boys are busy painting the map of South America. As they're involved with the activity of painting, they've traced the shapes of the puzzle pieces. They're evolving, developing their knowledge and understanding of the shape of the countries, the names of the countries of South America. But they're also, like the girl with the eyedropper, developing themselves, their ability to concentrate, their ability to use their coordination, their ability to make choices, what to focus on, which movements to use. In the bottom picture, this group of Montessori middle school students is actively involved together with programming a robot. In this activity, they're engaging with ideas. My idea is the robot can overcome the obstacle if we tell it to go forward, then left, then right. They're trying out ideas, programming with the computer, and then trying it and observing what happens. In all three examples, the three pictures, the children are actively involved, using objects and their senses and evolving ideas, using ideas to construct knowledge. Our Montessori process is more specific than what I've said. I want to share just a few more examples. Children construct knowledge by sorting. In this large bowl of different colored beans, sorting the beans is an activity, using the senses, feeling the beans, observing the colors, making knowledge. Children construct knowledge when they match. In color box 1, in this picture, matching the yellow, the red, and soon matching the blue colored tablets. When we match, we develop a knowledge of what is the same. By inference, we're also developing a knowledge of what's not the same or different. When things are identical, we're creating a mathematical mind of congruence, identical, the same. Another process that children are constructing when they use the material is to sequence. In the case of the brown prisms, sequencing from the largest prism to the thinnest or thickest to the thinnest prism. When children are using their senses in those wonderfully heavy, thick brown prisms and sequencing them according to size, they're understanding and evolving, constructing a knowledge of size, which is different from listening to people speak to you and talk to you about size. Another process that involves children with building or constructing knowledge is classification. Things that are the same belong together, but they're not congruent, they're not identical. In this example, the child is exploring objects to determine which objects sink, which objects float. The objects that sink belong together, they're equivalent. They're not identical, they're not congruent. They're equivalent because they have the shared property of floating or the shared property of sinking. This ability to classify, to construct knowledge is very much part of our Montessori process. And so is reasoning. As children progress through the CASA, then elementary into middle and Montessori high school programs, reasoning, being able to explain, talk about, why do you think this? What makes you say that? What's your reason for this choice? Or help me understand your thinking about. As children grow older, their ability to think about their thinking also begins to grow and develop. And our classroom experiences and materials are designed to support the growth of knowledge through a reasoning process. Remember, our Montessori experience is dual. It's not just pour water. That's a very practical thing to learn how to do, but it's also developmental. I'm developing coordination. It's not just trace the shape of the country of South America or somewhere else. which is a practical activity, it's also developmental. I'm evolving and strengthening my ability to concentrate and manage my coordination so that I ignore other distractions and only focus on what I'm doing here. There's benefits to our Montessori processes that engage children in constructing knowledge and information, but at the same time, they are, of course, constructing themselves. So when children use screens, that's quite a jump from our Montessori materials to screens, but that's the world we live in today. Children are surrounded by screens, and when they use screens, they move less, they initiate less, they're using fewer senses. They might be seeing, looking, and hearing, but there's no touch, there's no taste, there's no feel of weights or temperature. We know from research that children who are using screens excessively are not developing resilience and self-regulation. They're not able to develop the habits of persisting. This didn't work out. Let me try that. Or that didn't go this way I thought it would, so I'll do this instead. Instead, more children are just giving up and they're not developing self-regulation of emotions. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. I'm angry. I don't know how to manage my frustration. I don't know how to manage my anger. A result that's emerging is that children who are phone-based development, children who experience phone-based development are more likely to suffer depression and other issues. And there's considerable research now showing that when these iPhones became massively available to lots of children about 15 years ago, the amounts of depression, the amounts of mental challenges, the inability to self-regulate has exploded, more for girls than for boys, but for boys also. And it's because when children are using screens, they're engaged in a world of like, managing impressions, make sure people like me, responding quickly, disengaging from real life, not involved with play-based development, but phone-based development. Children are not getting what occurs in play-based or face-to-face development. Sensing each other, feeling each other, reading emotions on facial expressions, being able to understand and use body language. We're designed cognitively for live interaction. It's true, brain neurons are connecting while children are on phones, but brain neurons may not be connecting exactly the way they're supposed to connect, when they should connect, and the amount of connections may not be the same as what occurs in natural face-to-face interactions. It's not only children on screens, it's also adults on screens that are having negative effects on children. When parents or close adults are on screens, children experience a tremendous disconnect. It's called serve and return. Young children, especially, a baby, makes a facial expression, expects a response from the adults. When the response that is expected doesn't occur, the child experiences some stress. A little bit of stress is okay. It builds resilience, helps us overcome. But too much stress, the child is crippled, paralyzed, doesn't know what to do. The more adults are on their phone, the less interaction the child is having, the less the child is learning how to understand and read facial expression, body language, nuance, the ways in which we make knowledge become wisdom becomes less and less. You and I think if we could talk, would agree that children today are different. I've talked with Montessori teachers, 20 or more years of classroom experience. They all say all over the world, children today are different. Their ability to focus is more difficult for them, and they can focus for only smaller and smaller amounts of time. Are the children's brains changing? They've lost adult response, the effects of massive amounts of screen time. Does a digital environment engage children in ways that they prefer instead of our Montessori prepared environments? Children are coming to us starved for stimulation. They're coming to us expecting a hormonal high, dopamine, instant gratification, instant reward that you get when you play a game, that you get when people like what you've posted. A little bit of dopamine is fine, but too much. And we go through pains of withdrawal. Are our children and adolescents, especially, experiencing hormonal withdrawal, shock? And the answer to these questions right now, data, research is suggesting too many children and adolescents are. So I'm going to pause on all of these negative results of this world of big data, rapid technological change, massive disruption. I'm going to pause on that and come back instead to our Montessori root, which I've started to propose is rooted in the natural process of how children construct knowledge. They use their senses, they're active, they have to have a prepared environment, they're involved with such activity as sorting, comparing, matching, sequencing, classifying, reasoning. The development of knowledge is through interaction, not passive memorizing, which we'll forget anyways. Well, let's continue our Montessori line of experience. What is the Montessori understanding of how children and adolescents construct knowledge? In other words, where did this come from? Where did Dr. Montessori understand that children use their senses, that they're actively involved? And she understood as far back as Plato. And Plato thought that knowledge is already known. It's already in our inner soul. We're born with knowledge. We're born with an ultimate truth. We cannot deny this ultimate truth that's already within us. But what we do require is someone to guide us, someone to help us reflect consciously so that we can become aware of what's already within us. Now, there were limits to what it is we could know. Plato believed that there is a higher reality that goes way beyond our human comprehension. So our inner soul is connected, he thought, to that higher reality. But we're human. So how much of that we can understand and know is limited because we're human. And if we're not careful, said Plato, our senses will mislead us. Our senses will misinform us. And we should instead develop our ability to reason, because reason can separate us from the illusion that our senses are receiving or the misperceptions that we're receiving through our senses. All right. Well, we may not be conversant in Plato, but there's something familiar in our Montessori legacy about this idea of knowledge already being contained in our soul. Now, let me give you a specific Plato example. You're familiar, perhaps, from geometry with the theorem that says the sum of two sides of a right triangle squared are equal to the sum of the length of the third side. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This is a material from a Montessori 6 to 9 or lower elementary classroom. The white triangle, I've labeled the length sides A, B, C. It doesn't come labeled. But each side has a square. The shortest side, A, is the length of 3. And when we square 3, we would have 9 little blue squares. The length of the B, or 4 squared, gives us 12 yellow squares. And finally, the length of the C side, or 5, when it's squared, is 25. Now, the children can take out all the little red pieces and then fill that largest square with the yellow and blue together and physically construct the theorem A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and they can do it with these numbers. 3 squared, or 9, plus 4 squared, or 12, equals 5 squared, or 25. All right, well, let's come back to Plato. Plato wrote a dialogue called Meno. Meno was the name of a slave boy, 15 or 16, who had never ever attended school, who never knew anything about something called geometry. And Plato wants to demonstrate that this boy, Meno, excuse me, let me correct myself. Meno is an adult who has a boy who is a slave, forgive me. And the idea is to demonstrate to Meno that this boy, who's never ever had an education, actually understands, because the knowledge of this theorem is already within his soul. So, according to Plato, we need to help this boy recollect, recall all that's in there. The knowledge is already inside or latent in the child's soul. All right, how do we do that? Plato had a teacher named Socrates. And in the book Meno, Socrates, Plato's teacher, takes the child through a series of questions. And what these questions do, they're called Socratic questions, helps the boy remember what it is he already knows. The Meno person does not know anything about the area of a square. So he's unable to tell Socrates, I don't know how to do that. Maybe I double this, maybe I double that. Well, both Meno and the boy can remember what's already within them if both of them have a set of questions from someone like Socrates. What happens in the book is that the boy and Meno also, all of a sudden, understand this theorem. Of course, today we know it as the Pythagorean theorem, but it occurs because it's already inside of us. We understand it because we already know what it means. Now, Plato went further, way beyond geometry. The ideas of virtue, the idea of justice, the idea of morality, all of these come to us. We are already born knowing. We just need an experience with someone or even ourselves awakening what we already know. Now, these ideas are very, very important to Dr. Montessori. And in this quote, she says to us, we need to identify a prejudice that we have that interferes or gets in the way of our understanding that children and adults already know. And she calls this prejudice a prejudice that has found its way into the adult. The notion that the life of the child can be changed or improved only through teaching. This prejudice impedes the understanding of the fact that the child constructs himself, that he has a teacher within himself. That teacher, according to Plato, is the idea that our knowledge is already in our soul. We're born with it. What we do in life is to awaken it, to teach ourselves about what we already know. Teachers don't give us anything we don't know. Teachers cannot give us anything we're not ready to remember. So all of this inner knowledge, inner knowing, is very much a part of our Montessori understanding of how children construct knowledge. More specifically, Dr. Montessori used the allegory or the metaphor of the nebulae. She thought that you and I come out of the universe. The nebulae is the universe. We come out of the universe into our life. The nebulae, the universe, is the possibility, the potential of all life. Our atoms, science today says, are maybe 15.8 billion years old. The stuff of our body comes out of the universe. Spiritually, we are said by Dr. Montessori and many others to also come out of the universe, our potential. Newborn children are born with the potential to develop what they need to become adults. For example, and Dr. Montessori loved this example, we're born with a potential to acquire language. We're not born with a language. Now, this is a little bit different than Plato's thinking. Plato thought we were born with the knowledge. Dr. Montessori adjusts his thinking to suggest we're born with the ability to construct the knowledge. And language is a phenomenal example. A child born in China, but who's adopted and grows up in another country, will not speak Chinese, but will speak the language of the country the child is growing up in. The environment will directly influence the growth of our potential, but we're born with that potential. We're also born with an energy that Dr. Montessori called the hormone. The normal child shows tendencies which are strongly set towards independence. The development is by conquest, overcoming every obstacle on the way. The vital force which provides this urge is called the hormone. In the normally growing child, it is manifest in enthusiasm, happiness, the joy of life. We know that a child who is thwarted, who's prevented from pursuing what they need, will explode with anger, with frustration, will have a meltdown if we get in their way. This joy of life is a determination. I can do it. I will do it myself. And we adults are to be respectful and not say, not criticize, oh, the child is strong-willed. Oh, the child is annoying. Oh, the child is difficult to manage. This instead, this hormone, this energy is life acting of itself. It's the child determined. And we might see in a 2-year-old, they'll pour the water and it goes everywhere. They'll pour it again and it goes everywhere. This determination to practice, 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 practice until I can do it. And the child can move on to the next conquest and then the next. It's a passion of life. It's a passion that is fueled by curiosity, fueled by wonder, fueled by determination. This Montessori of how children develop knowledge, I think, is true even in a world that we live in today, surrounded by all this big data, knowledge explosion, technological revolutions. We haven't changed. And I'm confident that we humans are not going to change because, well, except children are changing. They are changing because we have these. We adults need to protect. I sincerely believe we need to protect children from the mind-altering potential of these devices. Plato had a student named Aristotle, who also contributed to Dr. Montessori's understanding of the growth of knowledge. Aristotle was not as confident as Plato that we're born with everything in our soul. He thought that human truths don't pre-exist. They're not separate, he believed, from everyday human experience. And it was Aristotle who argued that we develop knowledge from sensory experience, that sensory experience is the foundation for our ability to reason. Now, we use our senses actively and repeatedly to then develop and learn from our environment. Well, this idea of Aristotle is very much Dr. Montessori's understanding of the child's engagement with the prepared environment, an active engagement using their senses. Knowledge then is a result of human activity, which, beginning with the senses, as we grow, leads us to develop the ability to reason and then develop abstract ideas and abstract concepts, but rooted in real experience. How do we build intelligence? Through this timeline. First, engaging actively, determined our life force, using our senses, involving ourselves with comparing, combining, grouping. What's the same? What's different? What belongs together? Why? What can I do with it? How will I? What makes sense? All of that, a growth process. Today, of course, we surround children with our beautiful prepared environments, as you see in this picture of the CASA environment. It's an environment prepared to educate a child's human potential. It's designed for the child to develop themselves and their skills and their understanding and their knowledge. It's a personal approach because we know no two children are the same. We know they don't learn it the same way or in the same way. It's an environment that allows children to evolve independence and self-discipline. And it's an environment, excuse me, it's an environment that we surround children with human relationship. Specifically, we're here to care for this life. Our mission is not teach math. It's not teach spelling. It's care for this life, which has within it the potential, the drive, the curiosity, the determination to construct its understanding, itself, its knowledge. Again, these ideas of the prepared environment, the senses, the active involvement, borrowing from Plato, Aristotle, and borrowing too from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote eloquently about the necessity of freedom. The aim of education, Rousseau believed, is to learn how to live. We say Montessori is an education for life. And in order to learn how to live, children and adolescents should follow a guardian who can point the way, who can model, who can demonstrate a good living. But to develop this potential, to use these senses to become independent, children have to make choices. Children have to make choices and not memorize. Children have to learn how to live and not be complying with what others say they should do and how they should do it. Learning how to live is learning how to learn. It's learning how to become independent. For Rousseau, the children who are growing slowly are going to, he thought, not really develop knowledge until about age 12, 13, maybe age 14. Prior to that, they're living a life of sensory exploration. He actually thought young children are more like animals than humans. Of course, we in our Montessori work don't agree with that analysis at all, but we do agree that children need to have limited choices. And we say routinely, freedom within limits is the necessary component of a prepared environment that guides the child to develop themselves, develop their senses. Our task is not only to prepare the environment with those freedom and choices, but borrowing from Pestalozzi, our task is to observe. Prepare that environment. How? By observing who are the children, by observing what they're actually doing in their sensory experiences, by observing how their use of physical objects is guiding them to construct knowledge and learning to think abstractly. For Pestalozzi, the ideal teacher is both a guide and an observer, a guide who is willing to learn and who is willing to be taught by the children. Otherwise, we don't know how we should prepare an environment. And as we know, Dr. Montessori accepted and applies these powerful ideas from Pestalozzi. And she also accepted and applied the powerful ideas of the sensitive periods that she learns from Itard, who in the early 1800s, with a child who's unable to speak, maybe Victor was 12 or 13. After several years with Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, Victor can only speak a very small number of words. Why? We have a sensitive period for language. And as we agree from our Montessori studies, Dr. Montessori has identified other sensitive periods. What this means then is that in order to guide children to construct knowledge and to construct themselves, we should be aware that that process of construction has a timeline. This is the part of life or the time of life when movement will propel and dominate the child's. And that will recede in the background while the child gets involved with a powerful, sensitive period for order, followed by another sensitive period, and so forth. The sensitive periods tell us that each part of life, the constructing of a life, is very precious. It's very, very time specific, and we must be aware and respectful of each child's process. And finally, from Itard student Sagan. Sagan developed a series of hands-on learning experiences. His work, Sagan's work, showed that children using this material can develop their knowledge because this material is helping them develop the use of their senses. The material guides them to group things that belong together, to compare, to contrast, to arrange, to put into a series, and all of the parts that I mentioned earlier about how the construction of knowledge occurs when children use these beautiful materials. By way of a summary, we could say and should say that children and adolescents learn when they're active, when they're using their senses, when they're exploring objects. They need an environment that's filled with choices. And the choices they make and the materials that they use will be guided by their sensitive periods and developmental stages. And that we teachers constantly are observing to know what to guide, when to guide. Now, the materials, the use of the senses doesn't end at the age of 6 or at the end of this first plane of development. It continues in the second and third planes of development. I just want to take a moment and point to some wonderful ways that we are helping children develop knowledge in the second and third planes. Beginning with Dr. Montessori, the knowledge presented now must not be on the same scale as before. It must not be purely sensorial anymore. Now the child must have constant recourse to his imagination. This is the awakening of the child's self-awareness. This is the awakening of being aware. I'm aware of myself, of how I'm thinking, and I'm aware that others think differently and don't think the way I think. And Dr. Montessori imagined a child of 6, 7, or 8 asking, "What am I? What is this task of man in the wonderful universe? Do we merely live here for ourselves, or is there something more for us to do?" I suggest we don't need to worry that this is going to replace us as teachers. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about there's so much information here. What I am wondering is how we Montessori educators can guide children to use these devices to fulfill these personal quests. Wonderment is a drive to figure out, what am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? For Dr. Montessori, this is the awakening of cosmic task, the awakening of, for her, the cosmic vision that all life is related, that all life has purpose. Cosmic task is not a job. What's my profession going to be? We can't say. We don't know. We also can't say to a child or to an adolescent, "This is your cosmic task." As Plato would say, it's already in your soul. As Montessori believed, it's already within. It needs to awaken yourself, awaken to your own potential. Meanwhile, let's engage together in the mystery of finding out. And in the second plane, in the elementary classroom, the great lessons feed that desire to understand the mystery, feed the child's imagination and wonderment. The great lesson beginning with the story of the universe. Where did we all come from? How is it that we're all related? What are the physical laws that govern our life in this tremendous universe? And endless, endless, endless questions that we encourage the children to ask and begin to pursue. Well, let me continue then with number 3, my number 3. How should we guide children in today's knowledge evolution? And I think an answer, a Montessori answer, can come from our Montessori purpose. Dr. Montessori wrote, "We must realize the truth of our new mission. This is what I want to impress on you. Do not transmit merely knowledge, but take care of this life, which has the possibility of bettering all life." It's a great thing to do, yet so simple. Our task to take care of this life, the life of the child or the adolescent. But I think there's a second read here, and that is take care of this life, myself. Take care of yourself. In order to take care of another, I have to first take care of myself. Make sure I'm satisfying my physical needs, cognitive and emotional needs, and my spiritual needs also. Then, when I have taken care of myself, I can engage more completely in Dr. Montessori's vision for us, a life of service. She said, "I'm speaking of a level of love, which is no longer personal or material. To serve the child is to feel one is serving the spirit of man, a spirit which has to free itself." Children that horme, that desire to develop, I can do it, I can be it, I can be me, is that life acting of itself, that spirit which has to free itself. We get to serve as shepherds, we get to serve as guides. We're not insisting you must do this, you must be like me. That's compliance. Instead, it's you be you. You pursue your wonder. You pursue your imagination. You pursue your mystery. Dr. Montessori thought of the way in which this level of love occurs would give to us an intelligence of love. And I believe children teach us this intelligence. They teach us to respect. They teach us to accept. They teach us to be consciously aware of what we say, what we do, how we are modeling for this life. They teach us to forgive. And when we forgive, we fill with a love, and we also can fill with humility. These characteristics we work on for ourselves. We take care of this life. I take care of myself, evolve and developing these characteristics. I said at the very beginning, the children for over 50 years have been my constant teacher, and they're very patient with me. I don't always learn their lessons quickly, and often I thought I'd learned a lesson only to discover I forgot. And here I am having to learn it again. One Thursday morning, these two children you see in this picture that I took came to my office. I was head of a school in the United States, and they said, would I come to their classroom and see their work? Their teacher had already told me what had been going on all week. I couldn't wait to come. They brought me to this poster that they were developing, that they were making. I knew from their teacher that on Monday, together, these two girls worked on the map of Africa. They traced all of the country pieces. They began to color each one in. They started writing the names of all those countries, and they finished that work Tuesday morning. But then they began to look at books for pictures of animals in those books. They wanted to include animal pictures in their work. And that's when they discovered that animals are going extinct because of the actions of people. They began on Wednesday to develop this poster that you're looking at. They found stencils to trace, things to cut and paste, to put these pictures of the shape of Africa, animals, a piece of African art, different animals, and they began writing this poster. And on Thursday, they finished writing the words, "Stop the killing." They had discovered that there's an agency in Africa that is working desperately, quickly as possible, to stop the extinction of animals. And on Thursday, these girls asked me if they could show this poster to the families of the school Friday morning when everybody arrives and ask for money to send to that agency in Africa to help stop the killing. 6 years old. Even though this experience happened several years ago, I'm always moved by the children's commitment to life. So, how can our Montessori principles evolve our knowledge? Or are we going to wait for these big data, big computers to tell us how we should evolve ourselves and our knowledge? And for me, we should live our principles, because when we live our Montessori principles, we evolve. And when we evolve, our knowledge evolves. And we can begin with the principle of our cosmic vision, a picture that Dr. Montessori drew. In the very center of it, a little picture of a person relating to the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom. A person surrounded by the daily practices and histories of our political geography, cultural diversity, our economic geography. She called this a cosmic organization at the very top, man's responsibility, balance of life. At the very bottom, she writes, forests cannot exist without insects. Oceans cannot exist without planktons. Planet Earth cannot exist without people. Our cosmic vision, how to take care of all life. It's a great thing to do, wrote Dr. Montessori, yet so simple. I think what makes it simple is when we are committed to life. When we're committed to life, we are committed to respecting ourselves, respecting others, respecting the environment. I don't worry about AI. I don't worry about ChatGPT. I don't worry about it because it's not human. Will it mimic humanity? Maybe, probably. I guess it already is. But is it really human? No, not yet. Does it really understand, as we show children in the second grade lesson, the story of life? We show them this timeline. And here's but a small panel from the large timeline. And when we show this, children can see that all life is related. All life is connected. What came before us, what came after us, all life has contributed to this moment. And you and I are contributing to the next moments. Life contributes. And that's the power of that experience I had with the two 6-year-old girls. Stop the killing. Their contribution. We have a contribution to make. It's a contribution that I think supersedes. This is a tool. We should use tools responsibly. I firmly believe we need to protect children from the harmful effects of the tool. And if we're not protecting the children, we need to start protecting them now. But it's just a tool. It's not us. It's not human. Dr. Montessori said that everything has its own unique cosmic task. Okay, perhaps AI, ChatGPT, and the other forms are part of and have their cosmic task. I can entertain that idea. But that cosmic task is the core purpose, the mission each living being comes into the world to carry out. This idea that we're born out of the universe, it's in our soul, dating back to Plato and probably before him. Thousands of years of this wisdom of knowing that knowledge is guided by wisdom, the wisdom about life. In today's language, we talk about each of us becoming an expert at being ourselves. In today's language, strength-based learning, not improve our weaknesses. Maybe our weaknesses will never improve, but instead, strength-based, what I'm meant to be, who I'm meant to be, allowing me to awaken, discover my cosmic task, to live that, to contribute myself. Children understanding their cosmic task from their cosmic education, which, by the way, begins in the 0 to 3. We don't start cosmic education in elementary or in the third plane. It's wisdom that allows us to develop and use our knowledge. It's wisdom that allows us to apply data, information, knowledge to evolve and develop ourselves. Here's an example of what I consider to be a Montessori wisdom. We don't correct children. We can change the environment. We can change ourselves. But we don't correct children. When we apply this kind of wisdom, we're applying a Montessori principle that she spoke of as an intelligence of love. When we live this intelligence of love, we supersede data, information. We apply our wisdom, our intelligence of love to know how our knowledge can evolve us, but at the same time, how it can take care of all life, not just me. Where there is an intelligence of love, I believe there is a knowledge evolution. Maybe it's not just what we know. Maybe it's also how we know it, how we use it. What's our purpose? What's our mission? What's our vision? Together, if we live these Montessori principles, we're living something that supersedes this knowledge data revolution. Let me end with two quotes. First, from the book The Little Prince. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They are felt with the heart. Okay, maybe ChatGPT can mimic language that suggests what a heart feels. But it's not the heart. It's not human. Maybe ChatGPT can think faster than me, can access more data than I can possibly ever access. Thank you. What a great tool. But it's my heart. It's my heart that guides the application, the use of that tool. It's my heart that awakens to remember who I am, to awaken to remember the potential I am meant to develop, the contributions I'm meant to make, and for you as well. And I end finally with Dr. Montessori, who wrote, "The teacher must know and experience in her daily life the secret of childhood. Through this, she arrives at a new kind of love. When the children show her their real natures, she understands, perhaps for the first time, what love really is. It's a thing that touches the heart. And once these facts have been seen, nothing can cancel the impression their spirits have made and the love they were able to awaken." That's our contribution to the knowledge evolution. Love. Love is the primary, the primordial, the fundamental, what it is, this human life. Love. That's our contribution to the evolution of knowledge. I want to thank you for allowing me to present and share all of this with you. I wish I could interact and engage with you in this topic. These devices not going to go away. The technological explosion only going to continue. We're in a world now where the future is unknown. 2/3 of today's children having jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that don't exist. I believe we have a responsibility to educate each child's human potential and our own. And I believe by evolving an intelligence of love, using the wisdom found in Dr. Montessori's thoughts, but also from the thoughts of who instructed and informed her, children, and people like Sagan or Pestalozzi or Rousseau, or going back through the generations of people who evolved and shared great wisdom together, that we can evolve where knowledge is taking us, not wait for knowledge to determine who we're supposed to be. I welcome hearing from you. You can see my email. Please don't hesitate to send me a message. If you don't agree, I want to hear that. If you have insights I haven't had, please contribute your insights. I want to hear that as well. Thank you so very much. I look forward to the possibility of being with you in the future. Thank you again.